Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hillbilly Harbinger. I was originally actually going to do a different topic tonight. I was actually going to do a topic that was maybe a little bit more light. I mean, my last few ones have been, pretty heavy on the political side. So tonight I decided to, due to an overwhelming amount of requests via text as well as through emails, people were basically asking me, what, after especially my last talk, what did I feel are the chances of either World War III happening or, worse yet, a nuclear war. So I'm going to do a preface first on this, which is basically I am no expert. And I just want to make that really clear to everybody. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm definitely a history buff. I watch the news and do a lot of research on my own. I'd like to think I've traveled the world and I've been able to, kind of understand some of the stuff that's going on. So again, I just want to preface everything that, I'm not an expert, but I will provide my opinion based on, my expertise and information I've been able to collect as well, too. So before we start talking about World War III and the chance of World War III, I think we need to understand a little bit of history first, especially history between NATO and Russia. And I also want to clarify, like everybody's been, speculating what Putin wants. And I actually think, it's a fairly, I don't want to say simple because, world politics is never simple. But the reality is Putin wants the former USSR. They used to be a powerhouse, back in, before the collapse. They owned a large chunk of Eastern Europe as well as Russia itself. Just to give an idea, they used to have, I think it was 15 states at that time under the USSR. And when the USSR broke up, they dropped down to 3 states and 12 countries became independent. I think also, too, though, if you dig a little bit deeper, some of the other reasons, especially, is there's a lot of economic gains to having the Ukraine. We need to understand it's the second largest country in that area, only second to Russia. And they have a lot of grain markets. They have nuclear markets. And I just want to bring up Matthew, a very good friend of mine, that one of the nuclear plants is on fire in the Ukraine right now, which, I mean, we all remember what Chernobyl was like. And now all of a sudden, we're being dealt with something like this too. But that's another reason Putin wants it, is there's nuclear power there. One of the other reasons is that we need to understand that, under the new rule of the Ukraine, they have definitely been pursuing joining the European Union and potentially NATO. So, and for Putin, he looks at that as, Ukraine is a part of the USSR. He looks at it like they're Russian people. He really doesn't respect the fact that they're sovereign and they want to be sovereign. And I think that is, to think that they can go democratic and go literally the farthest thing away from what Russia is a real threat to him. And he also doesn't want to have too many of the NATO or EU allies literally sitting on the steppe of Moscow, because if anybody has looked at the map of Russia, you'll see that Moscow is very much southwest. So it's very close to a lot of the borders, such as Finland and, Belarus is his ally. But, it's very close, definitely within striking distance of, some of the NATO and EU states. And then I think one of the other reasons that's important, too, is he definitely wants the Black Sea ports. That's one of the reasons he annexed Crimea. And now, if you notice, he even as the attack's going on right now, a lot of his concentrated efforts besides the capital is on the 2 port cities on the southern part of the Black Sea, because for him to control that, basically gives him another launch point for his Navy besides the northern part of the USSR. So a lot of people are probably wondering why I'm bringing this up, because I think it's important that we understand the history. I think it's important we understand the economic games and Putin's mindset on it. And because that all helps us to understand, what the chances are moving to World War III, or worse yet, nuclear war. One of the things we need to also understand that's happened since this has been attacked is the world is more united than it's ever been. And for anybody who watches any of the United Nations stuff, even though the vote really has no legality to it, it's more just a message. But in the last vote, 141 countries condemned Russia's attack on the Ukraine. And then on top of that, there was, I think, 34 that abstained, and there was only 5 that voted for. And I mean, we could probably guess which ones those were, like North Korea and other countries, because they're, radical and hate the United States over anything. So I think it surprised me, and I'll guarantee you it surprised Putin. And I think he's starting to feel a lot more isolated now. I don't think he expected the world unity that has happened. I think he was hoping that even within the NATO alliance itself, it would cause some quivering and potential divide. And the reality is it's done the exact opposite. The reality is the world wants democracy. The world doesn't want war. They want to respect, sovereign states, and they want to work with each other. And 141 votes. I actually worked with United Nations, and I can tell you, in my 6 years of doing United Nations work, getting 141 countries to agree on something, that's a miracle. It really is a miracle to get that many countries to actually agree on something. And not only did they agree on it, they did a standing ovation at the end of it. So this is a strong agreement. This isn't just like, hey, way to go, guys. I mean, the world is staunch against what Putin's doing. And that's going to play psychologically on him. And he's starting to feel that with sanctions, because everybody's hitting him. I mean, even Switzerland came out of neutral status to employ, and I don't know how many people realize the significance of that. I think there's only been one other time that Switzerland's actually come out of neutral status. But, for them to do that, that's pretty significant. Now, the other thing that Putin's feeling right now, that again is his mindset towards, war, is the sanctions are literally starting to collapse the Russian economy. And that's significant because for people who don't know how Russia runs, first of all, it's communist, but the upper levels of Russia are mostly run by billionaire criminal empires. And that's one of the reasons, like a lot of people ask me, well, why are they targeting their billionaires? Well, that's why. Because most of the money comes from those, criminal empires that are headed up by these, billionaire individuals. And most of them, I'm not saying all of them, some of them might be legit because they're into stuff, but for the majority of it, they're crooked people. And so a lot of the sanctions have been put on there that's collapsing, the Russian economy, but it's also starting to impact these billionaires. And the whole hope of this is that it's going to, eventually buckle, one of them to do something stupid. I don't know if everybody heard this. I had to actually check into it to see it's true, and I did verify it is. But an actual Russian billionaire that resides in the U.S. and fled Russia has put up a $1 million bounty, dead or alive, on Putin's head. And that's really interesting because, obviously he has a lot of the understanding of the behind the scenes, regime of Putin's. But, for an actual ex-Russian person, especially one of the billionaires, to put a bounty on his head is very interesting. And then the other thing we're starting to see, and I know Putin's starting to see it, is the mass amounts of protests across Russia. And we have to remember, Russia 100% controls the media in Russia. It's not like here where we have freedom of speech and freedom of reporting and all those types of things. And yes, I know we have left and right reporting, but the reality of it is that in Russia, it's 100% controlled. And I've watched some of the announcements that Putin's been giving to his people, and it is the biggest pile of BS I've ever seen. But the problem is that if that's the only information you're receiving, for a lot of, especially the older crowd, they're going to fall in line and believe it. But a lot of the younger crowd is starting to figure it out. And also, I think that the other thing that's really important here is the one thing about lying is it's always found out. It's always found out. And it's only going to be a matter of time, especially when the dead, start going back into Russia and people are asking, why is there so many dead? You know, you got to remember a lot of Russians have family in the Ukraine. So when that information starts coming back, you know, the whole story is going to unravel and Russia's going to realize they've been lied to. Just as the Russian soldiers right now, you know, who are told we're simply going into Ukraine for exercises, all of a sudden realize that, you know, it wasn't exercises, it was war. So those kinds of things are going to really, you know, impact. Now, one of the things that was brought up here by Matt, and I totally agree, is he is stuck in the former Soviet Union mindset. And it's kind of what I said at the beginning of it. Like, you know, his big thing is he wants to see the USSR back. And the problem is you know, it's never going to happen. I mean, for one thing, some of them are NATO allies now. But I don't think that this, and I do agree with you a little bit on the sanctions. That's not going to dissuade them very much. But I think what it might do, though, Matt, is I think it's actually going to have it where outside pressures, you know, could stack up on him, especially when we're talking about the billionaires and you know, because when their pocketbook, you know how it is, they're married to money. They're not necessarily married to Putin. They may agree with him and everything like that, run with it because it's fueling those empires. But, you know, they're married to money, and I think their allegiance will be more to money than Putin down the road. And I also do agree with you that I had this point coming up, that another one of the pressures that is getting to Putin is the fact that he highly underestimated the Ukrainian army, like highly underestimated the Ukrainian army. Just to give you an understanding, I think Russia is ranked as the #2 power hub in the world for military, and Ukraine's like way down in the 20s. And, you know, Russia's obviously a superpower and Ukraine is not, and they're not even nuclear. So for the #2 army in the world to go up against someone that's ranked, you know, literally a third of the way down the list for power, and to be struggling as hard as they are and to be taking the casualties that they are, that's got to be playing on Putin's mind right now too as well. So anyways, like I said, you know, it is a lot of stuff that's playing out right now. Now, one of the things I want to get to, and I've alluded to as well, is Putin's mental state. And I think this has a lot to do with, are we heading to World War III? And I think it has even more to do, are we going to head to nuclear war? The reality is, I don't think Putin is actually functioning with a full deck of cards right now. He's been very isolated during the COVID thing. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos, you know, where he's addressing his top military guys, and he's sitting at this table that's like 50, 60 feet long, and he's at the end, and he's got everybody down at the other end of the table. And I think even in his mind, he's starting to think about assassination. He's starting to think about, you know, him losing his control. And also, too, we got to remember that, you know, although Putin looks younger, he's not that young. And so, you know, there's been rumors around the fact of his isolation, everything, that things like dementia could be affecting him. There's no doubt that he is definitely psychotic and a sociopath. I mean, you can just tell by his behaviors that, you know, those things are definitely there. So, and you can start seeing this in some of the stuff he's doing. Like, I don't know if you heard, but like he's threatened both Finland and Sweden. Just the yesterday or today, he flew some of his fighter jets over the Baltic Sea portion of Sweden's no-fly zone and within their territory. You know, and he's been threatening nuclear war. You know, like these are all things, I want to point out something about threatening nuclear war. Nuclear war is one of those ace in your pockets, right? Like, I mean, it's one of those ones that you kind of save, you know, in case things aren't really going your way. The fact that Putin went and invaded Russia, and this is just a theory in my head, but he went and invaded Ukraine, and is not doing so good. And then he starts to see the world coming together on it, and he immediately pulls the nuke card. I actually think that's a weakness. I really do. Like, I think, you know, he pulled the ace out of the pocket early because he's doubting things and he's not getting his way. And things are definitely not going his way. I think there's also resolve within the Russian army itself. You know, obviously there's logistic issues around, you know, fuel and food. But the reality of it is that I think Putin, his mental state is not good right now. And that doesn't vie well for the World War III and nuclear war card. It really doesn't. The other thing we need to understand is once Putin invaded the Ukraine, I know everybody's heard this term, but he's climbed his hill. Okay? He's climbed his hill. So he's sitting at the top of his hill right now, and it doesn't matter what direction he goes, he's going down. And so he's got that in mind, because he knows that if this war fails in Russia and he has to retreat, he is not going to be leader of Russia anymore. I mean, things are going to fall apart that way. So because he's climbed this hill now, he's a desperate man, because he realizes that his days are now limited. And I think also, too, the reality of assassination plots, he realizes that is there as well, too. And the reason I want to bring it up is that, it's kind of like a rabid dog. You push them into a corner, they can do some desperate things. So he is literally at a point of no return right now for his career. Regardless of the way this thing goes, we're either going to have World War III, nuclear war, or he is going to be assassinated, or he's going to return to Russia and he's going to disappear. So, and he knows that. And I think the world knows that as well, too. So that makes him desperate. And that's kind of a dangerous thing, too, as well. Now, the other thing that we still have to think about, especially with World War III, is like right now, this is basically a conflict between the Ukraine and Russia with world pressures, and that's all it is. However, if NATO and Russia collides, and it does go into World War III, that brings a lot more variables to the table, because usually when wars happen, everything escalates, especially world wars, and now all of a sudden you're going to have allies coming forward for Russia. And all of us know what that means is it means China. There's some radical countries like North Korea and potentially India that might jump on board. But the reality of it is that, if World War III breaks out, the biggest question is going to be what happens. I highly don't think that, the whole NATO-Russia thing is going to stay, or it'd be NATO, Russia, and Belarus. I really don't think it's just going to stick to those parties. I think at that point you're going to start seeing, especially Putin, when he realized, holy crap, like I'm being ganged up on, because he doesn't stand a chance. And if you pull nukes out of the question, he doesn't stand a chance against NATO. If he can't beat the Ukraine, what the heck makes him think he's going to beat NATO? I mean, we have some of the top militaries in the world, including the U.S. Now, I do want to address one thing, and I've been seeing this conspiracy going around, and I call it a conspiracy because it's just that. People are saying that the opposite narrative. They're saying that NATO has created this opportunity, like this issue, by pushing Russia. Okay, let's be clear on something. First of all, the USSR broke up. 12 countries left the USSR for their own reasons. Now, when we sat down at that point, we agreed to certain things as NATO, that we would not, ourselves would not push would push east. Okay, but you have to remember, these are sovereign countries. So it's only these countries that they have to approach and apply to be a part of NATO. It's not like NATO just walks in and says, yay, you're a member, here's your card. It doesn't work that way. And as a matter of fact, the actual test that countries have to meet to become a NATO ally is huge. They have to demonstrate true democracy. They have to demonstrate that they can contribute defensively, military-wise. Like, it's not like we just walk up and are handing out NATO cards. And you have to remember that a lot of these countries, like Slovakia and Poland, used to be under the Russian regime. And when they finally separated and gained their sovereignty and made strides towards democracy and everything like that, they wanted to protect that. They didn't want to be a Ukraine. And so how they did that is they said, we want to be a part of NATO. And what everybody's sitting out there pushing, saying, oh, NATO was pushing their influence and corrupting governments, that's BS. It doesn't work that way. I really encourage you to look up the North American Treaty, or NATO. I really encourage you to look it up and understand what it means to become a NATO country. And, I just wanted to put that one to rest because it kind of infuriated me when I saw that, when people were saying, oh, we should be blaming NATO and the Western, countries because they're pushing into Russia. No, they're not pushing into Russia. It's those countries that want protection from Russia. And why? Because a prime example of what's happening right now in the Ukraine. And I can tell you right now, if I was the Ukraine, I would be pushing for either EU or NATO as well, because everybody knows now what Putin's capable of. And who's next? Finland? Sweden? You know, like any of those countries now that aren't EI or EU could be attacked. And that is why people join NATO. It has nothing to do with us corrupting and moving our system east. That is just that's just conspiracy theory, and I'm sorry, but it is. Now, in my conclusion of the World War III part, I wish I could say 100% I did not think World War III was going to be happening. But the reality is there's a potential there. And it could happen in a few different fronts, but the biggest front is if, well, there's, okay, I'm going to say the biggest front obviously is most obvious, is Putin steps boots into a NATO country. Then we have no choice. It'll be all out World War III. Because if you look at Article 5 of NATO, it says you attack one country, you attack all. So we would have, all NATO countries would have a 100% obligation to now go to war with Russia and Belarus, period. So that's the obvious way to start. The second obvious way is if Putin defeats the Ukraine, no one is going to pull off sanctions. And that country's slowly going to go broke, which means that Putin's going to get desperate. And so that's another aspect that could start World War III. There's also some other ones, as if China gets brave enough and sees what's happening and saw there is the chance that China could attack Taiwan. But I actually think this move by Putin, I think to a certain extent has made, I think China, it might even rethink that. And I mean, maybe I'm just head in the sky on that one. But, I think with the unity that they saw, China might be really thinking now going, do we really want to be in Putin's boots? And I don't think they do. I mean, I get it. They have a lot of alliances and a lot of trade with Russia. But let's face it, 141 countries definitely supplies China with a lot more revenue and import and export than what Russia does. And I think that unity has sent a real strong message to the world that this whole conquering era is behind us, that we all want democracy and peace. So again, like I think the one thing I will say though, the only person who controls World War III right now is Putin himself, because NATO will not start a world war. If they wanted to, we'd be in it right now. They have more than enough excuse to in it, but they don't want to. They are doing everything diplomatically to prevent that from happening. The only person who can pull the pin on World War III is going to be Putin. And that's why I wanted to talk about the history component, the mental capacity of them, the pressures and everything like that. Basically, will World War III happen? It depends on how desperate Putin gets. That's the reality of it. No one else is going to start World War III. It really isn't going to happen. But if Putin steps boots into another country, I think it'll be a different, especially if it's a NATO country, then yeah, all bets are off. We're into World War III. Now, I've been talking for 25 minutes on this one. I do want to reach the other one, which is worse than World War III. It's a part of it, but it's worse, which is nuclear war. To understand, after the Cold War, there was a de-escalation of nuclears. Everybody realized during the Cold War that this is not a good thing. And as a matter of fact, a lot of countries were trying to work towards, especially the superpowers, of getting rid of nuclears completely. And the reality is, I think this, if we can come through this, I think this is going to show the superpowers even more of why we need to get rid of nuclears. Because, at the end of the day, and I am going to conclude with this again, but in nuclear war, nobody wins. And I'm going to kind of explain that scenario later on. So is nuclear war going to happen? And I hate to say this, that, if Putin is desperate enough and it comes down to his mental state, do I doubt that he would push the red button? Not at all. I think Putin, if he has enough of an ego, that if he knows that he's going to go down, he's going to go down in a blaze of glory. And I think that's just that old Soviet mentality of the USSR. And I really do feel that. Like, I don't think either scenario of him having to retreat or, stepping into Poland or whatever, like, I don't have any doubt in my mind that he would ultimately, go the nuclear route. However, I will say the threats to present right now have been bluffs. And I think those bluffs are due to desperation. First, he sees that things aren't going well, and second, he's trying to send a message of, please stay out of my business because I want to get this done. I don't think at any time he really, was thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to launch nukes this early in the game. But as this goes on, things get more desperate, and I think that's a thing we need to understand. So anyways, the other thing that, and Matt, I like what you brought up here. If World War III does happen, the West will have to make a very difficult decision about tactical nuclear strikes first, not to, too dissimilar to what they did with the A-bombs in World War II. I agree with that. But I think the problem with that is it depends on Putin's launch. It really does. I think, the NATO alliance response, if we go nuclear on this, I think a lot of it is going to be based on what Putin has done. And, just so people understand, like if you compare just the U.S. to Russia, Russia has more nuclear weapons than the U.S. It doesn't have more nuclear weapons than NATO, but it does have more nuclear weapons than the U.S. And the one thing is, a nuclear bomb isn't just a nuclear bomb. Just so everybody understands, there's different types of nuclear bombs. So there is what they call tactical nuclears, which are, a little bit more like a laser than a shotgun, but there is big ones too as well that are more shotgun than they are laser. Neither of them are good. They're all incredibly powerful, way more powerful than the atom bombs dropped in World War II. And the other aspect of it is it's not even just the immediate loss that's a danger, but it's the radiation fallout of the dust that goes in the air. And if there's enough dust go in the air, it can launch us into what they call nuclear winter, which essentially, it could wipe out. I wouldn't say it would wipe out mankind. I think mankind would make it through, but it definitely would. It would set us way back to like the Dark Ages. And the other thing is, a lot of people are asking me, like, if just the U.S. and Russia went to war, for as far as nuclear exchange, the reality is we'd be in the same situation. We'd still have the nuclear winters, we'd still have the nuclear fallout, but the other thing is we'd have two of our superpowers totally decimated and set back to the Dark Ages, which now puts the entire world peace into the hands of other countries, and countries that weren't superpowers before now all of a sudden become powerful. So it really would cause a worldwide ruckus. And I already talked on this. Putin's the one that's going to have to initiate a nuclear war. Definitely the reality of that is NATO is not going to spark it at all. This is 100% control in Putin's court. And again, I do want to come back to the thing that no one wins in a nuclear war. They really don't. And these leaders know that. But the problem is the NATO leaders have their brains together, and I really do feel that Putin does not. And he's a desperate man. He's losing face. He's losing ground. The world's against him. His country's going broke. All those things are backing a pit bull in the corner, and we just have to figure out what kind of fight the pit bull is going to do. So anyways, in conclusion, because we're coming up on the half hour, and again, if you have any questions or anything, fire them off right away. If not, fire them off later. But in my conclusion on nuclear war, I wish I could say to you folks yes or no, but the reality is Putin is just, he's too unstable to predict, and that's the problem. If there was a solid leader in there that I knew understood that in a nuclear war no one wins, I'd be saying, yeah, chance of nuclear war is nil. It's going to be a big bloody war, but it's nil. But the problem with Putin is he's too unstable in so many ways that I pointed out in previous thing that I can't guarantee there's not going to be a nuclear war. I would like to say that there isn't, and I do think it is low, but at the same time, it's not off the table. Now, a lot of people are saying, how do we get out of this? Because I've said that he's climbed his hill. How do we get out of this? And the only way I would say absolutely 100%, well, no, not 100, that's ridiculous. Let's say 90% is Putin has to be taken out of power, or he has to be assassinated. That's the reality. Because I don't think Putin has the ability to back off and go, oops, we lost. I think he either has to be taken out of power by revolt within Russia itself, or someone internally assassinates him and takes him out. That's the only way I can say no to nuclear. But the one thing we have to remember about Russia, Putin isn't the only one with this mindset within the inner circle. So even though Putin's gone, we have to say who's in the wings, who's going to take over Putin's position. Are they going to use Putin as a martyr, or are they going to use Putin as he was crazy, we're sorry, we need the world to help us get our economy back up. But there's no guarantee, because I have a lot of people saying, if we just kill Putin, it's all over with because it's Putin's war. Well, I agree, it's Putin's war. But that doesn't mean that the people in the wings are any better than Putin, right? There may be someone there for, but the reality is if anybody studied the history of Russia, anybody that opposed Putin, especially in the aspect of pushing any sort of democracy, is dead. They were either poisoned or shot, and that's not a lie. So, welcome to communism, right? Like, you can't get away with stuff in a democratic country like that. But the reality of it is that, again, even if Putin gets assassinated, it doesn't mean that it's over. It just means who's in the wing and how bad is it going to get. So anyways, people, like I said, I wish I could give you a much more conclusive answer of, yes or no to either of these. But I think the reality is I wanted to provide the information that I have. And now you have to kind of make your own decisions based on that. But I would say, is there a chance of World War III? Yes, definitely. I've labeled out the scenarios. And is there a chance if we go to World War III that a nuclear war could happen? And I would say that's in Putin's hands. And it just depends how desperate he gets. It's the best I can do, folks. Anyways, thank you, everybody, for joining me. And sometime next week I'll post and I promise next week will be a lighter topic. And also, too, just so you guys know, tomorrow night I'm putting my biology hat on and I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation on basically it's on wildlife management, but it's using mule deer as an example. So I really encourage you to join me. It's more an educational one than, general talk like this. But other than that, people, let's keep talking and we'll see you all next week.